A threat to freedom anywhere is a threat to freedom everywhere. And if you can't secure freedom here, you will be sure that people who want to kill Americans, who have killed Americans, will come here in order to man, train, equip, and prepare for the next war.
On today's Hot Zone, we're going to interview Brandon Wheeler. He's our Syria expert and Marine extraordinaire on the FBR team here in Syria. That's all coming up right now. Okay, we've got Brandon Wheeler, and I'm going to get right to him because he's got a lot to talk about. If you want to know about Syria, you got to talk to Brandon Wheeler. Why is that, Brandon? Tell us why.
Right. So I started working for a nonprofit in 2006 called the Freedom Research Foundation, and the initial project that we were involved in was conducting an assessment of the military, political, and ethnic populations of the Kurds in Iraq, Iran, Syria, Turkey. And so I lived in Damascus and studied Arabic there, and then spent a number of months on the ground meeting with all of the political leaders. So at that time, of course, the U.S. had just invaded Iraq, but the countries of Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey were pretty much stable. There was an insurgency of the Kurds fighting, but for the most part, not like the war post-2011.
So what is it that Americans don't get about this conflict?
What they don't understand is that, they've seen Americans fail from a military perspective in building governance. And the missing part of that is that culture matters in building governance. So Israel is in the Middle East and is one of the oldest countries in the Middle East, but it's significantly different than all the countries around it. And that's because the Jews and the Israelis are culturally different than all the Arabs around them. The Kurds are culturally different. They're originally Zoroastrian. Zoroaster taught good deeds, good thoughts, good words. So as a matter of culture, Richard Dawkins coined the term meme, which is a cultural memory passed from generation to generation. How do parents raise their children or teach them what their values are as a culture? America has a very distinct cultural value, a meme, if you will, how we see freedom and individual freedom. I always give the example, you see that small kid in a shopping market and mom's holding his hand and he pulls his hand away and says, "I have rights." Well, there's no other country in the world that a kid that young would ever say that to a parent, let alone it be true in some way, right? And that's part of the cultural memory. So the Kurds not only were originally Zoroastrian, which means Islam was imposed by them by invaders, but also they've always had a matriarchal society. Also, the Jews and the Israelis have had a matriarchal society, which means the mother has been a significant role of the family nucleus. And in any culture around the world where you see that the case, that women are treated better in society, it means that everybody's treated better. Because one thing that we know when we study internal conflict in civil society is that you can treat any one person, no matter what the conditions, at a given time, the way you can treat the worst person at the worst time. So if there is one class of people in a society that you can beat, behead, murder, rape, whatever, then you can do that to just about anybody under the right conditions. If women have a higher stature, and it's usually women and children, but if women have a higher stature in society, it means that you can't do that to them. So you have to treat everybody better. Also, women cut across all ethnic groups and all religions. So if women are treated better in a society, that means it goes across what we call cross-cutting cleavage. It goes across all the different parts of that society. So the Kurds inherently have, let's say, the soil in their culture to build a democracy, right? And when we invaded Iraq, we didn't understand this as a culture, as a military, as a State Department. And so we thought if we wrote them a constitution and got rid of Saddam, all of a sudden they'd be democratic. Well, it doesn't work that way. You have to have a democratic mind before you can have a democratic government. And the Kurds have that, and they have it in all four parts of Kurdistan. There are complications, but for the most part, that's what Americans understand of why this area is so critical.
So you say they have to have a democratic mind before they can have a democratic government. Is that why democracy has pretty much failed in Afghanistan and other places that are Islamic?
Absolutely. I wrote a paper on how to build governance in Afghanistan in 2005 for the National Conference of Undergraduate Research, using a theory called consociational democracy, which is basically reverse engineering. How did we get democracy in Western society? If you look at the late 1800s in Europe, there were warring kingdoms fighting each other in battles and different, it was not the Westphalian state of modern times. So what changed? And what changed is people got tired of fighting, but also Western society had these ideas. Martin Luther really had a significant role in saying, look, I don't need anybody between me and God. If you look at the way the Catholic Church was at that time, it's similar to how Islam is. They want to control the book and understanding and reading the book. You want to know what it says, you come talk to me. It's a fascist way of practicing religion. Whereas Martin Luther said, I don't need anybody. I go directly to God. And so absolutely, our failures are lack of understanding of the culture and a lack of being able to export the things that really made America what it is. It's not the bureaucracy and the money and the government. What made America was you had decentralized governance, you had colonies before states and states before a federal government, and you had people who had ownership and a voice in their colony and in their state. So those are the things, along with many other, our Bill of Rights, right? A common understanding of the rights of every person in society written on paper and guaranteed by the government and guaranteed by a military to defend it, right? Our colonies and our states to this day have state militias. And that's because it was written into the Constitution, because they weren't going to trust a federal government to say, you have your rights, but they trusted their state government to defend those, because all the men have guns and they were Second Amendment and they were ready to defend them.
Right, right. So if you look at what we're seeing right now between, with Turkey, with Syria, Bashar al-Assad, the Kurds, break that down into its most simple terms and most simple precepts to explain to somebody who goes like, I just don't get what's going on in Syria.
The analogy that I give is it's a chessboard. Imagine the country of Syria being a chessboard. And on the chessboard you have pieces. And the major pieces are the Kurds of the YPG, the force of the Kurds, YPG, right? And then you have the Syriac Military Council, and then you have the tribe of the Shamar, who have the Senedid. So you have Kurds, Christians, and Arabs, and then you have other Arab military councils. That makes up the Syrian Democratic Force. Then you have a political body, which is made up of all those different groups, Christians, Muslims, and Kurds, called the Syrian Democratic Council, and that's the political governance of the military. That is one whole piece, right, with small pieces inside of it. So you have the SDF, SDC, northern Syria, the self-administration of northern Syria. That's one piece, right? Then if you look at the western part of the country, in Idlib, you have what I call the United Nations of Islamic Fascism, right? You have all the ISIS fighters that were evacuated, you have Al-Qaeda, you have, you name it, it's insane. And those have all been moved by Assad or by Russia or by Iran to that area. Then you have the area that Assad controls, and he's another piece. So you have the Islamic fascists up in Idlib, you have the part that Assad is, he's not a player, he's a piece. Then you have the SDF, the STC, and the Kurds, and the Christians, and the Sunni Arabs in the north, that's a piece. Then you have Turkey is also a player who was using ISIS as a piece. And when they lost ISIS because they were defeated, they created their own piece, which is the Free Syrian Army. So on the board, the chessboard of Syria, you have the Syrian Democratic Force, Syrian Democratic Council, Assad, the Islamic fascists Idlib, and then you have the Free Syrian Army. Those are the pieces. The players are America, to some extent now, much less. We don't know if they're going to stick around and be a player. Russia, Iran, and Assad. Russia, U.S., the U.S., Russia, Iran, and Turkey. And those are the players of the different parts on the chessboard. So what's important to understand is that what drives people in war are ideologies, right? And so understanding each player understands how they use each chess piece. Because unlike chess, each of the players can play with each piece whenever they want. I'll give you an example. Russia, okay? It's not the communist Soviet Union anymore. But Putin, he's a thug. And he doesn't care whether it's the Islamic fascists. He doesn't like them too much in his own country, but what he cares about is power. So what he'll do is he'll work with the northern Syrians and the Kurds for a little bit, or he'll work with some of the Sunni Arabs for a little bit. He owns Assad, so he works with the pieces much more fluidly because he just wants to make sure he can control them all. The U.S. originally didn't support the Kurds. They created the Free Syrian Army. They funded, manned, and trained to the order of $1 billion, and most of them ran away and joined terrorist organizations, which is really embarrassing. But we did that all at the advice of Turkey, another player who's a NATO member who we thought was our friend. And the truth is, they were setting us up from the very beginning. So that kind of outlines as a framework and as an idea that you have the board, the country, and then the pieces and the players.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because I've said for a long time that most of the conflicts in the world today are proxy wars. Afghanistan is, it's Iran on one side, it's Pakistan on the other side, and the United States in there. You could kind of point that out in any conflict because the big players always have an agenda for the pieces. So here in Syria, what's happening right now? How would you explain this to your 6th grade niece?
What's happening right now is, I would imagine, imagine the end of World War II, okay? And when ISIS was defeated, for that short period of time after ISIS was defeated, you had this incredible opportunity where you had 4 million people everywhere east of the Euphrates River, so northern Syria, right? And it was multi-ethnic and multi-religious, in places where women were being raped and stolen from their family and beheaded and hung by ISIS. Now you had Sunni Arabs fighting along Christians, fighting along Kurds to build a government for 4 million people in northern Syria. They had critical infrastructure. That was a period of time where you could have the first democracy, true democracy, done by the people for the people in the history of the Middle East. And it's a domino effect. What made West Germany more successful than East Germany, or West Berlin more successful than East Berlin, was that life was better in the western part. And when you put these two things together right next to each other, people start looking over the wall and saying, hey, wait, why am I not living like that? Their life's way better. And in the fascism of Islamic fascism and the totalitarianism of Russia and Assad, those things are not going to be better ideas to freedom and self-government. It just won't work. So if you had played it out, and if we had done what we did post-World War II and built this place up, everybody in the area would want to be here. It'd be the most prosperous, successful place in the whole region. All of that may be lost. And what I say, people care about things that they can relate to. And what I say to all Americans, look, you may never see Syria, you may not know anybody who's from Syria, and you may, care about them from something. But there's two things you need to understand. A threat to freedom anywhere is a threat to freedom everywhere. And if you can't secure freedom here, you will be sure that people who want to kill Americans, who have killed Americans, will come here in order to man, train, equip, and prepare for the next war, because they are committed. Their ideology is committed, and they're going to operate here. And Turkey is making sure they have a place to operate. So now with the U.S. pulling out, and we were the guarantor of that 4 million ACE, and it was an amazing program. They had civil councils in every major city. There was a man and woman in every executive position. They had a legislature, a judiciary, an army, the whole nine. It was amazing. Now that might be all entirely lost. And because the U.S. pulled out, it's starting to fracture from the inside. Imagine, the First Continental Congress and the Second Continental Congress. It's delicate. It's a fragile framework. And now Assad is saying, look, can't trust the Americans. They ran from you. And so now you got to cut a deal with me. And Assad is not a good person. He's an authoritarian dictator, and he's going to make deals. What I can tell you for sure is, whether it's Putin or Assad or the Salafi Islamist or Turkey, who is the real Adolf Hitler of modern time, using an Islamic fascist, the one thing they can all agree on is that self-governance, individual freedom is a threat to all of them. So they will exterminate this project at all costs.
So when you're talking about Turkey's interests in this current conflict, everybody knows Turkey's a member of NATO, so why aren't they, you say they are not our ally. Why do you say that?
Because an ally is not based on membership to a club. An ally is based on activity. And if you look at Erdogan's rhetoric, if you looked at how he bought oil from ISIS, I've got documentation of fighters who were captured saying they came into the country through ISIS. They were recruited. I have photographs of ISIS flags in front of the municipal building in Istanbul of ISIS taking donations for ISIS. I've got video of the ISIS flag and the Turkish flag flying next to each other on the border when ISIS first came up the Euphrates River Valley. I mean, the evidence is endless. So all of their activity, it's not even a matter of this project here. The Islamic fascist ideology is the common thing that Iran and Salafi Islamists and terrorists around the world share. They may disagree about who should be in power, but they're still the Pepsi and Coke are the same bad idea. And so when it comes down to it, they definitely want to kill us. They might fight each other to see who's going to be in charge of the neighborhood, but they're two ideological gangs that want the same thing.
So what's the solution now?
The solution now is that the U.S. and the President of the United States needs to put all the military that he can here. He needs to reinforce this and build this government and try to preserve as much as possible.